I feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
Fellas, and the ladies.
Man, you're
Welcome
getting good
back.
at that. You don't even need help.
Welcome back to another episode of The Farm. Sitting down with my boy, Cody. What's your middle name?
Sir. Shane.
Shane.
Yeah.
S. Martin.
Yeah.
We'll just go with S.
ASM.
I won't call you Shane like that. That's messed up.
Yeah, that's so weird.
Yep. Cody S. Martin. We sitting down. I had actually it's from a conversation we were gonna have the other day, so I kind of we'll see where it runs to. One of the big thing is I wanted to talk today about. I think there's this one thing I've been seeing a lot through social media and a bunch of other platforms, or and when I say platforms, it's like, well, what do you mean other than social media? Let's say stages. Let's say, a platform, right, of what type of someone has built a platform in some way or another. Emails, whatever that is, right? Maybe they have a high position in some capacity somewhere. And one of the things that I was thinking about from that is some of the thought processes around how we look at information, process it, and establish again if it's eyewash, if it's productive. I actually had remember that post I actually did the other day with the Ramos, where there's like 20 different constraints, and if you haven't seen that, I'm actually going to break that down. It'll probably be out by the time this podcast comes out, but for the subscribers on IG, I'm actually going to break down like a lot of the different constraints that are happening and why and what they're useful for, yada yada. But one of the things I was actually thinking about with that, though, it's so interesting how when we view things, ideology that we might have behind how we establish its credibility, or also too how quickly we immediately kick it out and says that it's not useful or it is useful. And so one of the things I was thought was interesting, because I wanted to bring up with you, because there's so many things that even me personally, one thing I've learned over the year with experience is just, again, even in that post I actually made and kind of wrote like a thread on it, is this understanding of, hey, like, you don't know why we're doing something. So because you don't know the foundation of why we're doing things, which is also why we do like evals with guys before we start, why we also actually said with Aramistad the other day, I was like, dude, if I would have showed you this on first day, like all the things that you're currently doing right now, if I would have showed you all the things that we were about to dive into, like it would have been way too much, way too soon. And there's that psychology side of like slowly going down that route of taking on new philosophy or different ways of like going about how you do something. But one of the topics, obviously the bigger topic that I wanted to bring up is that filtering process that we have in our head. I think that when you're younger, it becomes very like white and black, and it's like it's very insecure. There's a lot of ideas that you won't even go down, as well. So as you get older, I think it could get narrower, or it could get wider based on like how you live your life and some of those things as well. But I kind of want to start unpacking that of like just how we process information, especially when it comes into from the coaching realm, because I feel like it's one thing that really holds us back as a whole, is just more so. And I know you and I have a lot of these conversations as well, which is I wanted to kind of give that to audience as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing, one, is the world's a lot more gray than I think a lot of people like to admit. And same thing with training. Like, the amount of times, what I mean by that is the amount of times that I've done a drill with somebody with the same intent, and then I try the exact same thing an hour later with a different kid, that is just a disaster, that I have to go a completely different route. Like, it's not as easy as just give everyone the same drill.
Yeah.
Sunshine and rainbows, and it's going to fix it. And two, maybe how I coach that drill the first time compared to the second time, but it could be the same drill, could make a world of difference. There's sometimes I'll do the same drill with a hitter myself, personally, with a kid back-to-back weeks, and just coach it differently, and there's a ton of results. And so I just think it's a lot more gray than people want to admit at times, and I think that's where too, like we always talk about, is being able to recognize when we're wrong, and then also too that it's always evolving and growing, and trying to be more right every day and less wrong every day, but never expecting to be all knowing, I guess. And so to kind of come back full circle with that process of what it looks like to filter that as a coach is, well, one, having resources and peers around you that also can hold you accountable. Like the amount of times that I hear you when you're working with somebody, where you ask for feedback from not just one, but multiple people that you respect and that you value their opinion. Like, like you don't ever, and then you don't go into the session and say, oh, I have this cue. Like the amount of times I've heard you in a session, yeah, like Tukes used to say this a lot, like you always give them that credit as well. Like the conversations that you've had and like, oh, blah, 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 really liked your entry here, which, one, it is cool that they agree with you. But also too, like you're not just assuming just because you thought it was good that it is,
Yeah.
you're always asking for opinions. And likewise, with me, like the amount of times that, I'll go show you video or you'll come to me and be like, hey, I see some of our hitters doing X. You know what I'm saying? Like that peer review is always so important. And then the ultimate test, like, do they hit?
Yeah.
Like cool, it looked good in the cage. Cool, like
Right.
they had some
Yeah.
good swings in the cage, but they also went,
What's not
over.
connecting?
Yeah, over last weekend. So like, did it really work? And so I just think without going too far in depth quite yet, like the filtering process starts with surrounding yourself with people that are trying to build you up and hold you accountable to be your best every day as a coach and a player, and always challenging each other as well as yourself to kind of push the boundaries within reason.
Yeah.
And then too, from my personal experience, I feel like with that process, I've gotten quicker at when I do try something, really understanding like, oh, that's not working,
Yeah.
and like when you say filtering, how quickly do I filter? Again, like 6 months ago, I may take 10 swings, like, with the same exact person, different intent of a drill or whatever, takes one swing and I'm like, no, completely dismantle that. We're going to go something like that did not
Yeah.
do what I, wanted it to
Wanted
do.
to do.
We're going to go a different route. And, and it's like, as you continue to surround yourself with peers and people that you respect and value and people that maybe you don't see eye to eye, but still listen to their opinions and thoughts with an open mind and heart, like you can take things from them and then really see a different perspective that maybe you weren't seeing before because of the position that you're in. And it could bring value to how you're going about that process as well. So I definitely think, just speaking from personal experience, that filtering process, and I don't know exactly what direction you wanted to go with that in particular, but
I
you
think
know.
it establishes actually watching into my spider web, because one of the ways that I wanted to go with this is the ideology. I think in large, we need to like you just pointed out, of like, hey, this is how we'd like it to look, right? That we're so open to feedback, that we're so open to new ideas, we're so open to these things, and we really want just like what works, right? Like everybody in general, I feel like if you have a good conversation with them, and someone that's level-headed in the same way, I think it's like, I forgot what verse it is in the Bible though too, but it was like talking about like, having conversations with a reasonable man. Like if they're not reasonable in the sense of, with that, it's something to be mindful of. I think it's inside a proverb or something like that. But one of the things it got me thinking in the same way is, why do we struggle with that? Because it's simple, right? And again, what I mean by that is like it's simple in ideology, and even like that, there's times where I do this quite a bit, where somebody, like for example, when you're like, hey, like you bring in and you ask for other people what they're saying and things like that as well. My brain immediately goes, sometimes, right? Like,
Yeah.
and what I mean by that is like, and I've gotten better and those things as well, but also very often, I'm very self-reliant, and very often, I get in my own cocoon, and very often I rely on my own experiences, and very often and all those things. And so sometimes it's pride, sometimes it's insecurity, sometimes it's arrogance, sometimes it's there's all these things that kind of pop up. And that's more what I wanted to really dive into, is like you said, I think you did a great job of kind of funneling out like, hey, this is how we'd like it to look, all these things. And I think more of a Me Too conversation here as well, is I want to talk through the real of why we don't, and why it doesn't happen more often, and why, even with us too, like even those things as well, is like, I think issues that people really struggle with when it comes to those things. And I think, one of the first ones I wanted to bring up, and we talked about this just last week, I think it was when I figured something out on the force plate, and I'm like, oh, like I was wrong about this, right? And so when we're wrong in the same way is, again, we actually at ABCA, I got to spend a lot of time with a good friend of ours, biomechanist, Scotland. He's been on the podcast. And so we talked, we really just got into the conversation just more so about how, I was giving a presentation on something, and Scott being Scott, he waited to the end of the presentation.
Yeah.
Then we sat down and he was showing me on force plate data. He's like, hey, you know how you said this, blah, 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 blah. Well, this is really how this torque is actually being created, and X, Y, and Z here. And this is what I'm seeing from this. And I'm like, oh, well, that's very interesting, right? Because, because I was thinking about it in this like one dimension, which he's like, you're not wrong. Like, you can create torque that way. And I get why you, thought it that way, but that's not how they are creating torque. And this is how, like, there's these people creating torque this way. So I was like, oh, like, again, like he had taught me something. And then he even too was like, kind of taking, the eggshell approach, with me, which he tends to do as a human. He's just very with that as well. And I was like, no, like, I embraced it. I typically, me and him have a good relationship. So I embraced it. I'm like, no, like, if I'm wrong about something, like, let's talk about it. Like, I'd rather, be, again, less wrong or moral would be ideal. And again, I'd rather look dumb today than be dumb tomorrow. That's like one of the things I think about a lot. So like, there's with that. But again, even in that instance, right, it's like, sometimes, right, like sometimes I'm in that place where that's really that really gets me there, where I'm really open to feedback, and other times that I'm really not, or I'm not even looking for feedback, right? So I wanted to bring those up as well. And actually I wanted to ask you personally, times that you have felt yourself, or now looking back, that you were more restrictive of feedback or not asking for it, and what are maybe personally, like, what you were struggling with and where that comes from, with you, maybe.
I mean, I think that can be, it happens all the time. Sometimes, none of the time. It just depends on.
Seasonal.
Yeah, it's seasonal. And so I'd say, historically speaking, I would say it happens more often when I get in I have a little bullheaded, like, attitude side that I can show at times, and where I'm like trying to prove people wrong mentality, and not necessarily those people actually verbalizing that, like, they think I'm wrong, but I build that, persona, because, like, that could fuel me. And so as a player, I could get that way where, again, self-reliant, I don't want help, I don't want to hear what you have to say, like, I'm just gonna go do it and prove you wrong.
Like an arrogance thing.
Yeah.
And I know that word sounds strong, but in and this is, again, a Me Too thing of that same thing of it becomes more of a, I don't need them, even though we obviously do need other humans in a lot of ways, but
and I
get it.
And I think too, I built that personally up because you see all these great athletes that had these crazy stories, like, I had no family,
nobody shot with me in the gym.
It's like I literally had to walk here to the gym to go take, and I made it to the league, and I'm like, both my parents were there for me. Like, I had a really good big brother, a little sister. Like, I didn't feel like I had that like family trauma.
I was gonna say, I want to stop right there. Is literally not run past that. Is how often that's personified inside the storyteller mentality. That it's actually interesting from my perspective when it comes into, let's say you look at it from like a therapy perspective, psychology perspective. Is typically when someone presents with that attitude of like, I was by myself, no one was ever there for me, all those other things. And we've had some players that play at some really high levels that have been like that with mentality wise. More often than not, just because, not that they didn't become, more self-reliant than other people for sure. But more often than not, let's just be honest, like, you didn't do it by yourself.
No,
it's not possible, right? First off, like, again, let's say when you're a kid, like, okay, well, somehow food was provided to you, and again, not saying that you didn't open your little lemonade stand, or you didn't do this, or you didn't do whatever, right? But in reality, with all of that, right? Like, okay, even let's say this, well, I went to open my own lemonade stand, I made this money, and I went and bought it from the store myself. Okay, did you farm it yourself? Did you drive it from the farm and you drove it to the grocery store and you dropped it off, and then you also did your lemonade stand, and then. Okay, so did you do it by yourself?
Yeah.
Okay, so then, and then you also get to the other place of like, okay, well, I was there hitting my, okay, well, did you made the money so you can go to the batting cage, you can hit by yourself, right? But like, did you build the batting cage? Was those your baseballs? Did you take the multi-million-dollar risk to have the building that you're hitting in? Like, Also, too, did you sell percentage of your company, or did you know like what? How
Yeah.
you know like? And what I mean by that is like a lot of times I had to do that with myself because I
Yeah.
was like that
Mm.
largely, and I still am eating away at a
Mhm.
lot of that too, where that
Yeah.
self-reliance comes in my head, which is like this pride that I end up building around. Well, you know, like I did all these things and I suffered, and and again along with it, like it was a fuel source for me as
Mhm.
well. But I think some of the dismantling on that same side of that is like when we do build the storyline of self-reliance, and that is
Mhm.
my story in my head, is I actually had when I played for Pine Bluff, University of Pine Bluff, Arkansas Pine Bluff. Um, our coach actually went in on a freshman about this one day
Mm.
because he posted, what did he say? It's a common saying that a lot of people say. It was like self-made, hashtag
Yeah.
self-made.
Classic.
He posted a freshman posted that on his thing, and my coach like made it a point, right? He at practice while we were running, which is not he wasn't punishing us for it. We were just doing our normal running, and while we were running, he was yelling at us. It was like a 4 a.m. lift or whatever,
Mm.
and he was like, I forgot what the kid's the kid's name, but he called him out, and he was like, I saw your post. You talk about self-made. Boy, you ain't self-made. God done did everything for you. He was like going in on it and like really like opened it up. And he's like self-made. Like, but he was like, it was a humbling, moment as well. Cause again, there's this side, and that's why I said the point of like arrogance. We like to blanket like big emotions, like let's say like arrogance as like a title, as it's someone that's far and beyond, like really far that way. So we don't contribute individual actions where like, hey, in this moment I'm being arrogant rather than being I am arrogant,
Mhm.
right? Like as a person,
Yeah.
right? And I think on that same side is with that, as I just wanted to touch on that same point, is that a lot of athletes, why that's became a fuel source for them, and maybe that is their story that's also in their head, and
Yeah.
again, maybe they're more self-reliant than others, is that it gets personified, and then younger kids like you, me,
Mhm.
others also adopt that into our storyline
Mhm.
where we're all the underdog, and people just haven't seen us yet, and they just
Mhm.
don't know yet,
Yeah.
and I'm going to show them, and I'm capable, and all these other things. And like again, like I said, I think it's a common thing that
Mhm.
happens a lot.
Yeah, and like you said too, like the arrogance. Like I don't identify as an arrogant individual by
No,
any
no,
means,
and I wouldn't.
but
Yeah, I rarely.
but like but also no, but
For
also
sure.
too, in that moment,
Doesn't mean you don't have
yeah, looking at
arrogant. Yeah,
reflecting on decisions and things, like there's times of arrogance, absolutely, and
sure.
I think anybody can agree,
Agreed.
when they reflect, and so, but to kind of go back to that is like I almost tried to build that narrative personally because I felt like that was the fuel source that I needed, because that's what every great athlete had, was this story,
Yeah.
this testimony. And I want to say it was an FCA event. I think it was Tony Dungy.
Mm.
Um,
That's cool.
is he involved with FCA? It's either
I don't know.
is
That's
him.
cool.
Yeah, I think it's Tony Dungy. He's involved with FCA in Kansas City.
Cool.
And he was speaking on testimonies and like what
Mhm.
it means to have a testimony, and he was like, basically, if I'm not mistaken, it was him. But anyways, besides the point, the message that got across to me was, you don't need something that other people view as traumatic
Yeah.
to happen to you for you to have a testimony
Yeah.
and for you to tell a story.
Yeah.
Also, too, just because someone else doesn't view that as traumatic doesn't mean that it's not a trauma to
100%.
you.
Yeah. Personal.
And perspective and that walk. And so,
Yeah.
Which is something I struggle with from my faith too, where everyone's
Yeah.
like, I come to Jesus because, my family was broken and this and
Yeah.
that. And
I
I'm
got in a
sitting
car
here-
accident. It killed my whole family.
Yeah,
and I had to come.
and I'm sitting here like I want to be closer to God, but like,
Yeah.
my mom's at home making dinner for me. I'm like, I was like,
Yeah.
and it is almost like I thought that something bad had to happen to me
Yeah.
for me to actually grow closer.
What do you think?
I was still like a freshman or sophomore in high
Yeah,
school,
I
pretty
was in-
young in my walk too.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. Is like
Yeah.
I think life is a pretty heavy.
Yeah.
Just we don't have to get in a car accident. My
Yeah.
family died for me to
Yeah.
be through trauma. You get trauma every single day. You walking
Yeah.
down the street, like
Yeah.
there's a lot when
Well,
you start to unpack
Also
it.
too,
Yeah.
like you always say, just because you got hit by a car, do I have to get hit by a car?
No,
like
to know what it feels like to
know-
suffer,
yeah.
or
I remember it was like one of the first times I was shadowing, you said something to one player was like, blah 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 did this, and you were like, just because they had to do that, does that mean you have to? Like, no, like it doesn't mean that you have to go
Yeah.
through the exact same thing. Like
For sure.
the same struggles of waking up at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Like yo, I was like, I had to go to 4 a.m. lifts, but if I coached at college, like my players are not lifting at 4 a.m.
No,
Like,
yeah,
like,
and that, I mean, and also too, there's positives to some of that suffering, but also too, again, suffering is subjective, and also it's also based on, for example, today what we would consider suffering, right? If you went back, you know, really not that long ago, just a couple hundred years, right? Like the average life today is by
Oh,
far.
yeah.
I mean, like I had somebody to give a talk the other day about, you know, just having a cell phone in your pocket,
Mm,
right? Like
that's crazy.
you would think because of technology, right, that that same thing is like, you know, because of just this phone in our pocket, like, and all the things and the access it gives us to, and or, you know, how convenient it makes our lives. And
Mhm.
I think about it all the time. It's like, man, and people listen to this probably gonna laugh. Is you know, but some of the younger generations, like they've never not had a cell phone. Like
Yeah.
they, I mean, again, like my nephews and them have a cell phone, you know, like at 10. It's
Yeah.
just like, you know, from that same side. And like I got mine in middle school, so not too long after them, but still, we didn't have smartphones. We just
Yeah.
had,
No.
you know, it was a phone. We could actually just talk on the phone, right? I remember having to pay for data service. That
Hey,
was-
hey,
that was
just don't
fun.
click the internet button.
Yeah.
Mom gonna be
Oh,
mad.
and it's gonna take 20 minutes to
Yeah.
load a page. But yeah, and having a cell phone in your pocket, like how privileged we are in so many different ways, as just, you know, and that's how it is. Well, the same thing will be for like our kids. Will be like, oh, you
Mhm.
don't know. Back in my day, it was so much harder. That's just how it goes. But I also think on the same side of that is, again, like just holding tight to our main narrative. I think that one of the things that is tough is with that is, as we go through life, we start to create these storylines, and one of them is huge, and something that I really been working on too is this ideology of like self-importance, right? And like we have a society that, you know, again, like right now, think about it, so many people that struggle with is like how many kids want to be an influencer, right? How many people want followers? How many people want hundreds of likes or millions of likes or whatever, right? It's endless, right? On the same side. And then also too, they get more followers and they realize, oh man, there's people with, I got 10,000 followers. Okay, there's people with 40,000.
Mhm.
There's people with 100,000. There's people with 100 million, right? Like,
Mhm.
you know, there's, along with that, it's like, you know, what those followers look like. And there's always something bigger and badder. There's always, it's like an endless game with that. And, but one of the things is kind of gets to the idea that is like this idea of self-importance. Like from a biblical lens, I kind of look at it from our heart's desire for to be uniquely loved, uniquely admired, uniquely all those things that, again, like God can obviously give us, have this unique relationship with us. But I also think on the same side of that, that need for like self-importance, or I can provide for myself, all these things, right? Like a lot of this gets built into us from a young age, from a society standpoint that comes in. And I think it really hinders our ability to grow and learn as we start to adopt and identify with these labels, types, definitions of what things look like. And there's a lot of freedom from breaking free of those. And I think that was like specifically like you were saying, is like when you're younger in your faith, and same with me, older in my faith, I fall into all the same same things. But I thought, you know, that being a major point, what do you think, what are some other ways that you think that you've seen just from experience from people being around you that they might have problems with adapting new ideas, or maybe learning from their mistakes?
I think too, something that I personally see more often with people, because I dealt with it, is when you see success with one thing that you think that is the truth. And so personally, not a big guy. And so when I started lifting, like actually lifting in college, I saw these huge jumps. I started playing a lot better, doing things better, all around felt better, you know, mentally, physically, had energy. You know, I just never lifted before. And you know, tons of benefits from working out and stuff, obviously. But and then my play, which is where at the time I put my identity in, was how I played. That also got better, and so I looked at that as the truth.
So would you mark that up as like awareness, or how would you mark that up? Like if you had to give it a title, if you had to give it a title, what would you mark that up as? Because I think that is a common thing. It's like false affirmation
Yeah.
or things like that as well. But like, you know, what do you think
Um,
would be the underlying?
I mean, you could label it awareness. I mean, I wouldn't ever say
I think we like
too
want it
that.
to be true.
Yeah, I think it was just that's the immediate result that I was seeing.
Yeah.
And that's where my feet were at that point in time. Um, and it's actually funny. I never thought about it this way until right now. But it's like that quote that one pastor said from my church in Colorado was like,
Mhm.
you know, when you feel surrounded, but you're really planted. And it's like, you know, when I felt like I was surrounded by all these different things that like I couldn't see. Like the mindset of being surrounded, I couldn't see the other things that could also be benefiting me.
Yep.
But when I had the perception or the mindset that I was planted here, I could also see the fruition that could come, you know, from where I was standing.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Where at the time, because I was surrounded by all of the results that I was seeing, and not able to or not willing to look at what else could be happening.
Yeah.
Or at least even seeking, right? I just didn't have the mindset that there was any other. There weren't bads that could come from this because what I was seeing right now was good.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like all
Yeah,
the
no.
current results were good,
Yeah.
which then too with time, experience, etc.
More to it.
You know, I get hurt.
Yeah.
You know, I the way I'm working out led
Not,
to
maybe it's
injury.
not so simple.
Yeah, well, and you know, but there was the way I was working out and the foods that I was eating based on trying to gain weight also led to me like, you know, I had to have surgery and get an organ taken out of my body because I had, you know, like because of what I was eating, you know, like
Yeah.
particularly my diet, like, and that's something that was pretty unique. But, and I was like, dang, maybe it's not as simple as, you know, eat more protein and just lift
Lift
twice a
big
day,
and
you know,
hit
like,
bumps,
you
yeah.
know, maybe it's not that simple. Like,
Well, and I think the same thing with that is that's why I think there's a deeper conversation that comes back to some of like pride and arrogance in the same way, and not so much arrogance. Because I think what the problem is like a lot of times when we talk about arrogance, most people are talking about like from human to human, and then it's like, oh, well, I'm not arrogant compared to this person,
Yeah.
or I'm not, but like we're all really arrogant in the sense of like our relationship with God, or also too like of all creation in the same way. It's
Yeah.
like how self-reliant we think we are, or like how much we don't need. It's like kids that feel like they're like I'm grown, you know, like
Yeah.
it's like the same way, and like how often we do that with God. And so I think on the same way as that, right? We see some results with something, and it's like, well, you know, again, like I figured this out on my own, you know, on with that, or again, I stumbled across the truth of what these things are. I've seen all these results. You can't tell me that, you know, you can't tell me that, you know, this doesn't happen because I experienced it myself and I did see results this way. And,
Yeah.
and it, from a personal experience, it's really hard in general, to, I think, and it doesn't matter how old you are, where you're at, is from personal experience to convince somebody otherwise, just because they, you know, there's emotions that are attached to those things of success and,
Yeah.
you know, struggle and perseverance and all these things that you build an emotional bond, you know, with those things. And I think on the same side of that, again, like it's so crazy because I think there's all these surface level like symptoms and things that we deal with, but then I think you also like source it back where it's, well, why am I doing this in the first place, right? Like what is the purpose of getting better at baseball, right? And typically for most of us, or coaching or whatever that is, it's very self-serving. Like usually the answer behind that is pretty self-serving, even if it's self-serving for others, right? And what I mean by that is maybe you put it behind, well, it's like, you know, for my family, right? Like my family's been here, all these other things. Yeah, but it's your family,
Yeah.
right? Or it's your loved ones, or who you've identified of what that is. How about everybody else that's in the space, right? That it won't benefit very much from what you're doing in the same way, especially because of how you're going about it.
Yeah.
Right. And like, this is also, again, a Me Too thing of the same thing of like me realizing too, a bigger, broader picture of how not only do you affect the ones that you love, care about, all those things as well, but also too, 99% of the time, the ones that you love and care about, all those other things as well, like don't even have those expectations of you, nor would look at you any different if you did achieve it or didn't achieve it. These are storylines that we've made in our head and held tight to, and, you know, become half twos and white and blacks in our head and all these other things. When in reality, when it really keeps down to those things is, you know, that's something that we've now created an identity in. There's something in that there we've now on that same side of like identified with, and it's a real hard conversation in that same way, because again, it comes back to like, as I really go deeper with that is I think our soul's desire to again be in relationship with God, and so we're trying to substitute that with so many different, ways, with so many different things or activities or achievements or with that. And I think the other part with that is like, okay, let's say that that's true. Okay, let's mark that if that was the foundation with that. It's like, okay, well, if I am there awareness wise, and like, you come to the end of yourself, or again for you all of a sudden are now getting other feedback that it isn't just lifting, it isn't just do these other things as well. What did you feel like helped you kind of change that mindset and be more open? Because again, if I could add this point for you specifically, and this is why I would also agree with like not identifying you with a sense of arrogance, is that you're very open. And the same thing as like, as much as there's as much as when I find things that I'm wrong about, like you constantly are also refining your skill set, and also very open to feedback and those things as well. So I think that like mindset wise, where does that come from for you?
Man, I mean, I think there's like a lot of stories and experiences that could lead up to that, and it's like I was actually talking to G's dad, this morning, and it was funny. I made a comment like the slow cooker, like in a world that wants Instapot now, like don't forget the crock pot, the slow cooker that took 8 hours overnight to make the food. It's like nasty taco meat from that, but it was funny because while you're talking about that, I was thinking there is like Al Coyan, my last year of college, like one of my biggest years of growth as a Christian friend, family member, athlete, like all these things. But I'm sitting there thinking about like all the experiences that had to happen to lead to that. The foundation being broken, that what I did make my foundation before then. Like I said, my identity was in how I played. And like we always talk about too, is like we have to have a steady foundation, or else when there is a storm, like this thing's going to get knocked down. And we talk about it in so many different avenues of what we do in life. And so I think too, it was that last year was really when I was the most open, because it was when I came to realization that everything that I thought I had worked for wasn't attainable anymore. Like, I was back for a 5th year in college. There's kids that are 4 years younger than me playing in the MLB, that I thought I was working for.
Yep.
I had 2 tears in my shoulder.
Yep.
I had a shattered finger.
Yep.
I was like,
Humbling
all these different things that I'm like, all this time I put in and all this effort, and I'm like, it all got kind of like pulled from me, and it really made me realize that where I was putting my foundation was in that, or my identity. And when that got all stripped from me, kind of like what you said, like the prayer is like, give me so much that I can't even handle it.
I need to be
personally.
overwhelmed.
Like I need to be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I never prayed that prayer in particular.
Yeah.
But when you said that, I was like, I identify with those emotions for sure, because that's how I felt.
Yeah.
And then ironically, it's funny because I would probably say that coaching staff in particular, I'm one of, if not like the only one on my team that liked them. But I was in a completely different headspace.
Yeah.
Spiritually, emotionally, everything in my life was so much different than what it was in the past. And this particular moment, it was like our second day. It was like our second day practicing with this coaching staff, and some kid showed up late, who always shows up late. Like every single practice is just, was ineligible the year before. And he comes, and the coach didn't say anything at all. In particular, I think it was a player that was like, yo, hustle up. Like, we've all been here. Like, let's go. And the kid instantly like puts his hands up and was like, whoa. And so my coach like stopped everything. The coach didn't discipline him, yell at him, nothing when he got there. It was like, you know what, he's here. He ran to the field, like he obviously knows he's late, whatever. And one of the players was like, yo, like let's hustle up, like we're taking your time. And he puts his hands up, and it's kind of funny is my coach was like, he flipped and put his hands down. He was like, you sit here and you try to hold on to whatever BS reason you're not here on time. Let go of it and just be here. It's like, let go of whatever reason that you think it is or excuse that you have of why, like, I don't care. Just let's do this. Like, this is where we're at right now. And like, that was a really big moment for me in my athletic career where I was like, I had all these reasons why, like, oh, someone hasn't seen me, or blah, 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 just didn't give me the opportunity, or, I just saw the wrong hitting coach, or, I got injured. Like, I was supposed to go here, but I got injured, like all these different reasons. I was like, it was a really big step where, and then two, he wasn't using it and didn't talk about it spiritually at the time, but after that moment, when I started to build that relationship with the coach, realizing how strong in his faith him and his family were, and my whole coaching staff, and he was basically using his own experience and like in his spiritual walk of how he was trying to hold on for control and all of the reasons why he can do what he's doing right now, but in all reality he needed to learn to let go of all those reasons and let God. Like, that's what he says, like, let go and let God. Like, he's not in control, and he used it, typical, college baseball setting. It wasn't the most spiritual wording that he used, but the meaning behind it came from a spiritual experience that he had in his walk and his faith, and that really connected with me, where I had a lot of experiences where it was someone else's or something else. Like, I know I'm putting in this time or this effort, or I'm doing this in particular that's right, or what I thought was right, and really just learning to let go of whatever I think is right, or wrong, and be more open to the fact that, to me, these are all the reasons I'm late. Okay, it was like, don't care. Like, that basically is like he and
not that
he
they
had
don't
this,
matter. It's just
yeah,
that at the end of the
that,
day, it's going to be, again, everybody could have things of what's going on in life, what they're prioritizing,
yeah,
what they're managing, all those other
absolutely.
things. We all had a different way of how we got to. We could have been crossing paths, right? Like, we all
Yeah,
have different lives and cross paths and
yeah,
things that are going on. But
no,
yeah,
for sure.
being big.
Yeah, and then like talking to like Clark, one of our Zoom hitters, about this, is like,
Zoom hitters.
yeah, a Zoom client
Yeah,
hitters,
for sure.
but he we talk a lot too, a lot of like mental confidence, mindset stuff, and um definitely something with him is we talk about a lot is detaching yourself from whatever you think the result should be,
Yeah.
um and realizing that, well, one, you can just use a cliche saying like baseball's 9-on-1 out there. Like, you're batting, there's 9 defenders. Like,
Yeah.
it's hard. It's a hard game,
Yeah.
or the old class is round ball, round bat, try to square it up, all these different things. I'm like,
Yeah.
Detach yourself from whatever you think the result needs to be,
Yeah.
and go out there and prove yourself right. Like that,
Yeah.
no matter what people make you think you need to do or whatever, like, just go out there and play with the character and the heart and the passion and the joy that you take to practice and to school on a day-to-day basis, and go play that way. Like, just go play that way, and you'll and one, that'll redefine what you think success is, because that's what broke my mold. Was like, I thought success was going 4 for 4, and I'm like, I'm going 0 for 4, and I'm like, I can't wait till Sunday. I was like, 0 for 4 in my game Saturday. I was like, I can't wait till Sunday. I was like, because those at bats, like I'm feeling better. It's like, I'm feeling better. Sunday, they're about to be a problem on Sunday. And then I go 0 for 4 on Sunday, and I'm like, well, I can't wait till next week, because I'm getting closer and closer, like I'm due. It's like breaking what my viewpoint of what success was.
Yeah. I was gonna break with that, and I think some of the big pieces, like, again, along with that, is like, I think even for me, one of the areas I struggled was, I thought I was gonna get there logically, and that one of the things of being as well is like what was actually healing was, again, as my relationship with God grew in those same ways, that it gives me the ability to like feel into these new areas and new logic, right, of what my foundation is from. So I actually pulled up this clip. It was kind of the other day. There's I don't know who this guy is, but he's talking with someone that I believe to be an atheist, and he just was trying to help him understand how little control that he had
Mm.
over things, and even over, you'll see as he talks about, even his own body. And he kind of goes through these things, and it gives a different perspective. So I'm gonna play this. Maybe we'll just wire this in, but for now, I'll just play it through the mic so we can just hear from the same side. Okay, hold on. Turn this bad boy up.
Would you go to heaven or hell? Hell. Does that concern you? If it was real. It is real. I know it's real. You know it's real. God's given you knowledge of his existence. Look at the genius of his hand all around you. Your eyes have got 137 million light-sensitive cells. Human beings can't make an eye from nothing. Just think of the complexity of life. You're not even in control of your life. Do you realize that? You can't stop yourself blinking, thinking, breathing, dreaming. Your bodily functions happen irrespective of your will. You can't help but go to the bathroom every day. You can't help but go to sleep at night. You can't help but blink and breathe. All these things are set in motion by God, shaped by your DNA, your height, the color of your hair, color of your eyes, your personality, were all written in the instruction book of life the moment you were conceived. And within that psyche that you have is a will to live. Something in you says, I don't want to die. You're not an animal. You're not a dog or a cat or a horse. You're a human being made in the image of God with a knowledge of right and wrong, given a conscience by God, which is society shaped, but God given. You know right from wrong, and so on Judgment Day, you can't say I didn't know.
That was pretty deep. But I was just thinking about the same thing too, is like we build our whole lives on these things that we feel like we have control over. Well, we build this lives with this falsehood of a foundation that we can control all these things that are in our life. And then again, what builds on top of that is arrogance. It comes out in a place of arrogance. And when that same thing too, it's like, he's saying it's like, yeah, we have control over things, but very little things that are like, even choices with ours. And then even on top of that, when you get deeper and you realize from a psychology standpoint, how much that we're picking and choosing our things based off past events. So we're not even, again, a lot of times we're very animalistic in how we process things when we're responding from traumas or past hurts or, again, how we've developed our entire psyche, like based off of these realities that we believe to be true in our life. I did it, but what made me successful was I lifted, and that was what really and that's why you need to lift. Well, what made me really successful is I used to think swing down, and when I swung down, what made me really successful is I got with a psychologist, and every single person needs to be with a psychologist, or there's no way you're going to be successful. Okay, well, what made me, and then like there's all these things of what everybody ties to of what saved my life, and this is now my reality of truth. Yeah. Right. And somebody could even argue that the same thing too of like, like religion or God or, things that have happened in the same ways. But like foundational, those other things is like, it's not that there isn't a truth in things, but there's a difference between truth in things and the truth. Yeah. Right. And so a lot of times, literally within any belief, there's truth. And every belief system of everything, there's truth. And then there is the truth. Right. Of reality with that. And again, we're only seeing things, we don't see reality as it truly is. We see reality from our perspective of what we believe reality to be. And that's like our experiences in life can be so altered and so different from life to life along with that. And so like one of the big things that I think a lot about with this like as well is when we break that back, pull that layer back, and we realize how little control like that we actually have and how little we actually are, right? Is because we see it's like our original sin, right? We wanted to be God. We wanted the knowledge of God, right? We wanted to be equivalent, right, as God in that same way. In some capacity, the arrogance of like comes along with that. But what we don't also come along with that, we were kind of talking about this in the office earlier, is the responsibility that comes along with it. And we don't want the responsibility of God. No, absolutely not. Right? We don't. We just want. We want the miracles, the worship, the flick my finger and this happens, and control and all these things, right? But also too, like there's the other side of that, of the responsibility that comes along with that. Anybody that's ever been in a position of leadership in some capacity, maybe you were a parent, a coach, captain on your team, or friend. All these things that we can, in some ways, that we had some responsibility in the same way that, again, along with that title that you now possess, there's a responsibility that now comes along with it. If someone's going to call you their friend, there's a responsibility that comes along with being somebody's friend and not a stranger. In that same way, even if you call yourself a human being, right, there's a responsibility that comes with, the weight of being a human being. You have different expectations of a human than you do your dog, or your cat or your whatever. I think on the same sides of that, people build, resentments based off of these things and what they expect from these titles or these different responsibilities that come along with it. And one of the things I think is the humility that comes from with that is if you start to realize how little your life that you actually have control over and how much is provided for you from either another human being or God directly, if it comes into like your bodily function and how all these things that are working just because God told it to.
Yeah.
And like and my deepest, one of the things I actually got asked, because when I was in college, I had this really good nutrition teacher. And one of the things he really spoke about, he's like, I get asked a lot because, he ran a big couple classes inside the science department. He's like, and it's a Christian-based school, right? They're like, how can you believe in science and God at the same time? And so he actually went into this it's so fun because I can understand his passion now, me going so deep into science, is when you understand the complexities and then you go into the math side that is tied directly with science, right? And you understand the odds of these things happening and how they form. And like he's talking about, like with your eye, like that we are literally still trying to design almost every piece of machinery to do what a human being can do, right? And how we think, like we can't even we're building cameras that are the camera, the same thing we're recording this podcast with, it was designed off of the human eye. How it indirectly and how it processes light and all those things, we try to copy. Like we don't even have original ideas. We're trying to copy God's creation and make creations off of his creation, right? Because it's how unbelievable. Like we can't build the human body. We try to do it in pieces. We try to do these other things, and like the complexity that comes along with it. We're still trying to understand consciousness and what it really means, and in respect to other animals, and also as we look deeper into animals, we're actually realizing more and more how conscious they are than we thought they were, and how much more intelligent they are. I was listening to a Joe Rogan snip the other day where they're talking about this 500 to 700 pound bear, a grizzly bear that's walking, and there's a construction cone flipped over, and he just like rights the construction cone, stands it straight up, and then like keeps walking. Like, well, what was the point of that? Like he didn't try to play with it. He literally like flipped it, pointed it straight up, and then just kept walking. Right. And it's like there's these little things of like as we go deeper in with the like animals and all these things of like what that looks like. But I think again, as you get deeper into the science side, when you understand the complexity is like of just a human cell, a single atom, any of these things, like how deep and complex it all had, like how perfectly everything needed to come together. That we're just close enough to the sun, but just far enough from the sun. We're just so that we don't, the planet doesn't light on fire, or it also doesn't freeze. Like, and then we're all dead either way. Like again, a little closer, a little further, like we're in trouble. Like we don't exist. It never happens. Like the odds of you being born, how ridiculously that you're being born, and like what that process even looks like from a mating standpoint, like all of these things that we have from that other side, and then we've built this in that cocoon of thought and this thought process of foundation, that we built this ideology that we were so self-reliant, and we got it, and I've been living here for almost 30 years, right? I've been living here for 30 years. I got this stuff figured out, all these other places. When in reality, like along with it is we're more in need of others and God the Creator more than we could ever fathom, and from that same side. And again, once we start to adopt that responsibility of thinking that we don't need other people and that we don't need God and all those other places, like, well, soon along with that also comes the responsibility and the weight that that takes to really believe that and try to live your life that way. That, again, when you do get into trouble, you don't run to God. When you are wrong, you're the essence of science, or you're the essence of information or wisdom or any of those things. It's like that's a responsibility that you know if you really want to bear by yourself.
Yeah.
And that's why even for me, I don't know if you ever done this code. I did. I did this just the other day. I thought it was like kind of breakthrough for me. Was something small. We were with a hitter, pro guy, and I'm sitting there watching him hit, and I asked God. I said, I invited him in, and I'm like, tell me what to say. Tell me what he needs to do. Like, I'm asking you for wisdom. I'm asking you, what it doesn't matter logically what I think needs to happen. And again, like I've done a lot of work. I've read a lot of textbooks, right?
Yeah,
God, I've done all these things. He's like, all those wisdom in that textbooks, like I gave to them. So like, remember where it all comes from, right? Is like the true essence of any of that stuff. Or again, I've worked with a lot of hitters and all these things like, yeah. But me just going straight to God in that moment, it's like, that's an area that I hadn't let him in, which is like, yes, when I unpack with him at night or those things, or when he inspires me, but like in the moment, God, like, what do I say next? Where do I go? What do we use? What implement? What does he need to do? Where do we need to stay? Right. And again, I felt like it was one of the best sessions that we, had in that same way. I was just like, man. And also immediately what that did is it also freed me up from the responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. Like, well, God's telling me what to do. Right. Like, well, God's telling me what's next. God's telling me, all these different things that are happening. And like one of the things that's, I think, big for me in that same way is like, I also know what it's like to be on the other side of that, of being like, yeah, God's telling you what to do. Yeah, I hear you, Joey. No. But I'm really trying to give you insight in the same way. As I spent more time with God, the difference is also now in my head, when I'm talking with him, I know what voice is his and I know what voice isn't.
Yeah.
And so when he tells me, like, for example, when I see a guy hit, there's a billion drills that run through my head. There's a billion cues that run through my head. There's a billion ways that we could go and which way to choose. God is but I also know distinctly, it's like your best friend talking to you, right? Like again, for example, like any of you guys, but definitely too, the one that's been along with me is Taylor, right? It's I could be in the middle of a conference. Like I could pick Taylor's name.
Yeah.
Like I can hear her voice and know that it's her.
Yeah.
Like we've been over a decade together, right? So it's like same thing. It's like with my relationship with God, it's like, I could be in the middle of the noisiest thoughts in my head and like immediately knows which one is his. Like there's no deeper intimacy that I've had with a human being on this earth, right, than I've had with God. Like it's not even close. They don't even fathom together. So like when I hear the same thing, it's so clear, like, which way to go as I spend more and more time. In that same way is that like, I truly, one of the things I feel like when we're coaching coaches that really want insight from a lot of breakthroughs I've had, it's like, I can't just give you, oh, this is my thought process without like, I can't not talk about God because like, he's my foundation.
Yeah.
Like how am I supposed to tell you why I picked what I picked when God's the one that told me to pick that?
Yeah.
Like without talking about God, like it doesn't make sense. Just doesn't make sense. Like, why would you go with that? I don't know. God told me to do it and it worked. Like, and then also too, I think people have that thought process, like, there's this thundering cloud. I don't know if you didn't notice last week, Cody, but the building didn't shake.
Yeah, no, I heard it actually.
And yeah, okay. The building didn't shake and yell at me.
Jarrell was worried about the utilities next month when I heard it.
Yeah, 100%. Joey, you need to do this, right? It's just more of, again, like I know what's within his alignment of why and what is coming from him and what is not, just because of how much time like I've spent with him, and intimacy, and also too how much time I've spent with him when no one's around.
Yeah.
Right. Where we're truly intimate in that same way. When no one's watching, when the camera isn't on, and I'm posting, singing with him and for for dinner or something like that, right? Like all those moments where it's like that's one moment. Okay, well that happens a billion times. That's happened so many times. And so I just think on the same way with that is like when we remove ourselves from us being the foundation and us having the knowledge and us having the wisdom, well, then I think that literally tying that back to what you said beforehand is that's when I can disconnect myself from the result, is because it was never me in the first place.
Yeah.
Right? Like it wasn't my wisdom in the first place. It wasn't my idea in the first place. It wasn't all these other things in the first place. I'm not looking for someone to tell me that I did great or, whatever that is, And so I think that becomes, a big place of like how to get there. Because I heard that a million times. People tell me to disconnect from the result.
Yeah.
people having conversations about like, hey, like you can identify with it. Okay, like I hear you, I get it. Logically, it makes so much sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? But how the hell, like I don't feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I do. It bothers me a lot. When my hitter doesn't hit,
Mhm.
it bothers me a lot.
Yeah.
When someone's struggling that I'm close to that I love, like it bothers me so much.
Mm-hmm.
It consumes my day, it consumes my thought, it consumes my heart. I
Yeah.
can't think clearly. I make mistakes. All these other things happening, and that's where I tie God back to my performance. On the same side of that is like, if that is my foundation, it becomes problematic, and I start
Mm-hmm.
roller coaster riding this bad boy because again, think about that. The altering, and I know that you know from just experience,
Mm.
is the altering of that foundation. When your foundation changes, it changes how you view everything.
Mm. Yeah.
It-
Everything.
and that's where I think we spend so much time, and I think like the devil's ploy here, right? And the enemy's ploy here is if you think about if we spend all this time working on symptoms, we'll never get there.
Mhm.
Right? And there is not a destination, but more so an experience. And so what I mean by that is that we get closer to there,
Yeah.
right? Which happens to be God's, more presence, and we get pieces and touches and taste.
I was even gonna say, I know you
Yeah.
said pieces differently, but peace at whatever there is,
For sure.
not a destination, but
Yeah.
whatever there means, like
Yeah.
peace, knowing that, that could mean anything.
Yeah.
Too.
100%. And that's where you go to the same thing as well, is like, I'm less concerned with getting to heaven and more concerned in being in God's presence.
Mm.
And again, if like heaven doesn't have God, then I don't want to go there either.
Mm.
And that's where I think the same thing with it is like, I'm not trying to get anywhere. I'm trying to be somewhere, which is being in God's presence.
Mm.
And like, then if I can consume my life with that and day to day and every interaction and every being, and where I keep spirit led and he stays in the front of my forefront of my mind, my life looks a lot different. And again, along with that, where there's peace in every moment. I know there's joy in every moment. There's all these
Right.
things that I'm missing throughout my day that are really the things that fill me up.
Mm.
And if I keep that at the forefront of my brain and keep him as conscious as possible, and what I mean by that is he's also going to be, by thinking of him consciously, he's going to be in my subconscious. And I think like that is like, again, like how often we're praying with him, how often we're talking to him, how often, all those things. And again, I also say that also knowing that if Joey 5 years ago, 6 years ago, heard the same conversation that I'm having now too, it wouldn't make much sense
Right.
because it's such an experience where now when I would go back and I remember things that people would say to me that they would connect so much. Because like you said, when I said something, what'd you say that I said the other day that you said you connected with because you felt it? It was like
The prayer, pray to have so
Overwhelm.
much overwhelm me that I can't hold
Yeah,
on or hold
I can't
or
on.
control.
Yeah. And that for me is like a personal experience there, is that there's some things that I hold so tight to or I hold identity to that the only way that I would let go of them is if God overwhelmed me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And what does that mean? Like, for example, like, when you start thinking about your life differently, when people close to you die, or when there's a new year, or you just get so overwhelmed. It's just like, literally I have no other option.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no other way to go. It's like God it's like if you're in a building and like it's flooding and there's one exit, it's like, bro, you don't got a choice.
gotta
Like
go
this
there.
is the way we got to go. The building is on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so sometimes there's decisions in my life that I would never make if God didn't overwhelm me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I needed him to overwhelm me. I needed him to flood the building and burn and like cause some chaos here.
Yeah.
Right. Where he left me no option but to rely on him.
Mhm.
Right. And that's like, again, biblically, like, I know I just said it in a different context, but like being baptized by fire, right. Or being
Mhm.
baptized in the same way where it's, it's being sanctified throughout life in that same process. Where I'm grateful for those moments where God has overwhelmed me, rather than looking at them as moments of, and most people, it's like most distress, right? Like your
Mhm.
mom died, your brother died, your whole family died in that car accident, like we talked about, or
Mhm.
something like that. Whatever that looks like in your life, and you can on the same way. Yes, there's going to be trauma in those moments too, but also, again, that's another way of distraction,
Mhm.
right? That is getting us focused away from the blessing that is inside of every single one of those
Yeah.
burdens. And again, it gets our eyes, like the devil wants us to shift our eyes off of God
Mm-hmm.
in those ways and focus on, even if it's chasing down, like, how do I remove myself from this, right? Well, does that mean like not caring what anybody says? Well, that's not really good either, right? Because like you want feedback from people, like you want to listen to them. You just want to learn how to listen to them and with love and listen to them, and see them how God really sees them, right? Like there's just all of these other things that go into place, and I think along with that is like we get so caught up in all of these trying to fix all these symptoms, and I don't want to feel this way, and I wish it wasn't like this, and this isn't fair, and all these things that are not very useful for us. Just like we talked to hitters about in the box, like umpire calls a strike. Well, I didn't like that call. Okay. Yeah. Like, what does that do for you?
Yeah.
Right. Arguing with them, then you go in the dugout, slam your helmet, and it turns into all these things, right? Like, when in reality, again, like there's a foundational issue there as well. Is like the reason you can't detach from it is because you've tied yourself to it. And okay, well, what made me tie myself to it? Well, maybe it was really important for you. Maybe it was really important for you because when you were younger, you felt like you watched celebrities on TV, and you felt like the only people that they cared about were celebrities or athletes or whatever that was. And because we also got to remember, one thing people forget a lot is athletes back in the day were not celebrities.
No.
That's why they didn't get paid much money.
Right.
Is because people didn't idolize them like they do now.
Yeah.
They don't like now. It's like if you go ask the school, what do you want a kid wants to be? Most of the time, it's going to be an athlete. Like that's a large majority, right? Because they're celebrities and they're athletes. It's like both. They're hitting both. It's a nasty drug right there, right? And that reality of that same thing, or be an influencer, or any of those other places, it becomes
Which is
hard.
a celebrity, not
Which
an
it's
influencer.
celebrity too. It's in its own right. It's just a different way. And so I think it's that same side of that is like, we want this attention, we want these other things, and you're probably different for a different podcast, but it leads to the other things like you and I were also talking about too, is the bad byproducts of what happens when you build your life on that, and what comes with that platform. How many people struggle with psychological health on the side, or don't have peace, don't have joy, really are spiraling drug addictions, coping skills that are not great, like all of these things that spiral away from with a real need that our souls have that are not being quenched.
Yeah. So a lot of thoughts and a lot of things that come to mind after listening to all the things you said, but I'll do my best to kind of tie them all in and make it all make sense. But definitely one that connected when it comes to the filtering process is very similar story like you were saying with Tay. Was pastor in Colorado told this story, was like, hey, it's like people always ask me like, oh, like, how do you hear God? And then also to context, this guy was a drug addict, lived a very different life than he lives now, opened up a church later in his life, like and so he speaks with a lot of passion and conviction from past experiences. And he was like, I used to be like I'm sure you heard God, like whatever. And he's like, as a pastor, I get asked all the time, like, like how did you hear, like, what he was saying and what he was telling you to do? And he was like, man, it's like, the answer, like, no, it's not what you want to hear, but like, it's simple. It's like, spend time with him. And he was just like, there's no one that my sons spend more time with than me and my wife. And he was like, we're at a basketball game or a football game, I can't remember. He was like, people yelling super loud. And he was like, I kid you not, like, spoke at whatever volume I'm speaking now. He was like, whatever his name is, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, instantly through all the chatter, just like, wow, turns his head. And he was just like, how? Well, he spends the most time with me. He knows what my voice sounds like. He can distinguish what that sounds like, and he can hear what I have to say.
Yeah.
And he was like, all I wanted to do was tell him I love him. Like, he was on the sideline, and I was just, gave him the heart pound, like, I love you. And he's like, but I wanted him to know in that time, like, whatever was happening out there in the field, like, I want him to know I love him, like, regardless of what happens. And he's like, but he could distinguish through all that sound what my voice is. And then to kind of tie that into like personal experiences, is a lot of times too, I feel like when I spiritually, I'm like, hey, I want to be closer to God, I'll go and I'll pray. And it's felt like it's like recurring prayer, recurring answer for like 5 years. It's like, yeah, read the Bible. It's like, I don't like reading, it's like, I don't, it's like, and then, next week is like crazy. yeah, you guys only have to read the Bible. Our Bible app has like this auto that you can listen to it. And I'm
Mhm.
like, shoot. I was like, he really wants me to know I just got to read that darn
Yeah,
Bible, huh?
for sure.
And so,
Yeah.
you know, from personal experience, it's like, you know, and it comes that sometimes too, the answer is right in front of us and we're looking everywhere but where the answer is. A lot of times, you know, I got like 3 Bibles. Got one in my room, one in my car, one in my backpack. No matter where I go, I got it. And it's like, and I still ask, what do you need? It's like, well, you know, for some reason, God put it on my heart to have 3 Bibles in 3 different locations that I spend the most time. Is if I'm anywhere other than my car and home, I got my backpack with me. It's like, so I got a Bible on me and all, like, and then also too, I guess you got a phone too. Just thinking about that, like, really got it everywhere.
Mhm.
It's like, you know, it's always there, and it's just like, which goes back to, like experience wise, 2 people in that last year of my college career. I can't remember who I was talking to, where like really big influences were you and my head coach at the time, where I believe I told them my favorite thing about both of them is they tell me what I need to hear, not what I want to hear. When it comes to, you know, in particular the situation with you, I was shadowing,
Yeah.
and I'm sitting there listening to stuff about hitting, just like basically breaking every mold I had for what hitting should have been, and you know, like what I thought and was taught and everything. And I was like, you know, okay, I needed to hear it. I didn't want to hear that everything I've done the last 20 years that I've been working hard for has been in the wrong direction. But
Same.
dang, I needed to hear it. You know, it's like,
Same.
or my coach was, you know, sit here and tell me like, you asked me to hold you to these expectations, and now when I hold you to them, you got a problem. Like, I'm like, shoot, he right. It's like he's right. It's like I did ask him in particular to hold me to that expectation, and like when he did, I got upset with him. That's
Yeah.
not his problem. That's my problem.
Yeah.
You know that I'm the one that's having the reaction to that problem. Like he's using my words to hold me accountable to what I asked him to.
Mhm.
And you know, like from that sense too, um, you know, the spiritual side of all that as well, of like really all the answers that I go to him and ask for. It's so funny. I go to him for a specific answer, and he's like, or I'm like, hey, I'm listening. And it's like, every time it's like, read the Bible, read the Bible, read the Bible. I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't want to hear it, but I need to hear it. It's like every time I open up that thing, whether I randomly open it up to a page or just random, I go to a specific book that I'm having a Bible plan, or just a verse that popped up on my phone that I wanted to read more context, and like whatever it is, it's always timely, always connects in some way differently, and I can
Yeah.
see how it is in my life
Mhm.
every single time. And it's just funny because like that's biggest struggle for me, like spiritually, is like I really don't like opening up that Bible.
Mhm.
But it's again like I'll listen to music, I'll worship, I'll pray, like I'll do all of those. But I really, the one thing spiritually I don't like doing is opening the Bible. I just don't like reading. I don't like listening to like people talk. Like it's just hard for me. But it's where the biggest growths are. And to kind of tie that in is like that's where um, and I know it's kind of like might not make sense to everybody, but there's like this movie that comes to my mind when you brought up the I'm grown thing, and it's like connected with it was it's a movie called The Guardian. It's like a
Mhm.
Coast Guard movie,
Yeah. Yeah.
and where Ashton Kutcher is like,
Uh-huh.
you know, had all these traumas, and he's in this office with the senior chief guy, and he's like, don't worry about me, I got me under control, and he was and the senior chief's like, I can see that.
Mhm.
I was like, let's go. I can see that. You know, and one from the experience and the understanding that the character Ashton Kutcher, I believe is Jake in the movie, was like the experience that he had. He was like, no, like I know what you think. I've been there.
Mhm.
It's just, it's not it, buddy. Like
Yeah.
let's go. Let's, you know. And I think at that time he was like, let's go have a drink. You know, let's talk about it. And I'm like, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, how many times too in life that it's like, I got me under control. I got this under control.
Mhm.
You know, when in all reality, it's like the surrender and the how little control do you have.
Yeah.
Um, which comes to like a quote that I was actually going to ask a question is like, is almost like my go-to when I feel like I get overwhelmed or even if I don't have the awareness, but someone brings that awareness to me, is like everything matters, but nothing matters,
Mhm.
as well as like for some reason that like recenters me. Is like, yeah, so like if I show up 5 minutes late, like, is it that big of a deal? It might be, might not be. Shoot, you know, as like, and it's so hard to explain to people,
Mhm.
where I feel like a recurring thing for me is like a presence of calmness. Like I don't feel like I get like too worked up about a whole lot of things.
Mhm.
Um, at least I don't visibly show people that I get worked up about things. I usually deal with that internally by myself,
Mhm.
which also too time for another podcast, but
Mhm.
because I know you're gonna want to talk about that. But
Very good.
again, normally I don't like portray that like I'm all worked up. Like yesterday, toilet goes crazy, you know. And Christian's like, "How are you so calm?" And I'm like, "What am I supposed to do? Like freak out? Like
Yeah, well,
it's
there you
just
go.
it's got to get unclogged. It's got to get cleaned up. It's got to get mopped. Like that's it." It's like, you know, me freaking out over it, making a big deal is not going to change that the toilet's overflowing.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
Could make it worse.
yeah, and then too, like whatever. So I was like, Are you gonna unclog it?" Like, no, like it's
Yeah.
like, no, whatever. And so, like that calmness that sometimes I don't even recognize that I have in situations, and people
Yeah.
ask me, and it was I believe it was my sister. We were talking about this when she was out recently, and it was like she brought awareness to, well, you know, when things happen to me, like I don't respond the same way you respond. Like, you know, it's different. Um, you know, like my coach did this and I did that or whatever. Like I don't remember exactly the conversation. And like that saying came to my head is like, well, everything matters, but nothing matters. You know, it's like, yeah, that could work you up. What's important to you also, like if you show up 5 minutes late, but softball's unimportant to you, like probably doesn't matter if you show up 5 minutes late. But, you know, if your career matters to you and you show up 5 minutes late to a meeting, like that may mean the world to you. Like that could, you know, ruin your day,
Mhm.
you know? And it's really hard to explain to people that peace and like the understanding that, you know, like whatever just happened, like it it does have
Mhm.
an effect on me, but it doesn't ultimately like affect me, I guess. I don't know another way to say that. Like
Yeah.
it's a baby step, but as long as it doesn't become a habit or a problem, um, you know,
Yeah.
it is what it is, you know, like
Well, I think you got micro and macro. You know, you got micro only matters because of the macro. So like on the same way, like how do I position my step from day to day? It's like I start with the end in mind, right? Like in that same spot. Like that's why I think it's always so important. We're looking like goal alignment or like understanding like a legacy of what you want it to look like. So I think on the same side of that, right? It's like does I used to talk with leaders about that of the understanding of you're right, like for you to be good at the job that you're currently at or just to be like enough, like just enough and doing enough for that position. Like again, you're right. Like along with this, like just to be on the team, right? Like you could hit these things and these things as well, but also too, when you look from a legacy standpoint, it's like how I want to be remembered and the impact that I want to have on others is on the same side. It's like, you know, it's not the, I could show up thus 5 minutes late, right? Or, you know, I could just not go to this game because it's my nephew's game.
Mhm.
I could just not come to this little league game that he's going to, right? I could just not show up. It's, you know, it's not my kid. You know, no one would be upset about it, like any of those other things. But sometimes I look on the same thing. It's like, or you get home, you've been working all day, someone wants to play catch with you. Like I could just not play catch with him today,
yeah.
right? But also on the legacy on the same side of that is like the macro and the same thing as well. It's not to say that you need to every single day that you need to go play catch with him, right? Or any of these other, again, there's so much context in between. But also on the same side is like let that being your motivator in the same way is like, you know, again, life is moving and life's moving, you know, with or without you in the same way of like where your conscious mind, if it would like it to move on or not like it to move on. But also with that macro in mind, it keeps you in that same place of, I know what my legacy, I want my legacy. I know how I want to make people feel. I know how I want to, like, for example, like, should I stay extra 10 minutes with this kid today?
Mm-hmm.
Well, like, it's more important to me about like how I make, you know, I'm feeling. And also too, again, along with it, like what's macro happening, and what God is using me to do. And so like that aligns and kind of gives me trajectory on why I say yes to things or I say no to things. It's not particularly because this is the biggest podcast or that is the biggest, the following that they have. Like, again, sometimes, you know, again, I'm doing things that don't really make sense for us, even as a business from micro perspective,
Mhm.
but then me and Joel would kind of talk about that of like, I don't know, macro perspective, like, why I'm aligning certain things, or why
Yeah.
I'm posting certain things, or why like macro, what the effect and things and what I want other people to feel. And then like you wrap all those things back in together is like macro in the same way as my relationship with God being a massive macro.
Mhm.
Again, along with that, it's like you kind of got to look at it too. Like, if you were like in this relationship with you and your partner, like there's certain things that I do that I can really hurt my partner's feelings,
Mm.
right? And also too, on the same side of that, with the deeper we are in intimacy, like those things become more and more clear of exactly what that looks like, or what I said, or there's certain thing that could be very common that I could say to you
Mm.
that would not hurt your feelings, that could really hurt Taylor's feelings, or
Mhm.
something like that, right? Because I know their life experiences.
Mm.
And so then a lot on the same side of that is like my relationship with God in those same ways is like, um, I don't do things trying to earn God's love.
Right.
I do things because God loves me, and
Mhm.
that's like the opposite way. It's like
Yeah.
is like it's one way that I worship, Him, is by how I act, how I interact with others, where I spend my time, where I spend my money, where I spend my time with people in the sense of, am I trying to move them closer, or am I trying to be right so that I can
Mhm.
feel better, about whatever thing I'm trying to fulfill within me. And like you said with that is like, once you remodel those things and put all of them back in place, and how like we were meant, it was meant to more so be together. I think it also too brings, obviously, when we live in what how God designed us to live, it's
Mm.
like a tool being used how it's supposed to be used.
Mm.
Is that we also too, like when you're using your wrench as a hammer, it's going to get beat up
Mm.
quite a bit. It wasn't designed to do that. It wasn't
Mm.
designed to move that way. It wasn't designed to work that way. And so there's going to be a lot of things where the tool ends up getting broken, damaged, all these other things, because I'm trying to use it in a way that's not supposed to be used. And like humans, as we go throughout life, we get broken, damaged, um, and we may never be the same. Like, there's no amount of counseling or like there's nothing I'm going to do to make your son come back.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Right.
there's no amount of psychology, or you're not going to get the psychologist and all of a sudden your son's going to be alive. Like
Yeah.
that's not how that works, right? But it's okay that, like, again, when we use this wrench as a hammer, it's going to get dented, and it might be dented to the end of time with this tool is usable or whatever it is. It's more so, again, that process of what it looks like is like, first off, like, you didn't need to be this. You were designed to be a tool, right? And like you were designed to be, and we might have been misused, and we might have done these other things. These things might have happened. It doesn't mean that you're not useful anymore. Maybe you're useful for different things now, and at different seasons in your life. Maybe, like at this point, again, like, we do for a part of your life, you're used as a hammer, then we started actually using you as a wrench. And then also at some point you got so stripped that, like, hey, you're more productive if you're over here, holding these papers down. But you think of holding these papers down that I'm not significant anymore. Well, actually, he put it on top of, you're in a semi truck, and it was on top of these papers. And if you weren't there, the wind would have blew through this car, blew it in his face. This guy would have flipped the semi truck and killed, 50 people on the freeway. Right. And like, and how God is using us, and how he can get every last drip out of us of like what he designed us to do. And keeping that awareness in the macro, where it's like, where everything matters and nothing matters, is like you're saying, is like, in the macro, there's nothing that we can do that's not deserving of that. God is all of a sudden not going to love us. So that, in that turn, there's no reason we can't run back to him. But also, in the same sense, like how we act on a day-to-day basis is going to dictate also to not only our legacy, but also how we live. And that, like, there's that one speech I really love. It was a speech, graduation speech at a college. And the guy said that one of his mentors used to always ask him, like, how you living? And I think that's the biggest questions I ask with guys is like, hey, yeah, you can live your life that way. But again, I would ask you, and you to be honest with yourself, is like, how are you living? Right. And it's not so much about what you do day to day, but like your perception and how you view, life, and what you carry with you every single day, and the weight that you carry comparatively to how your life can be. Right. And by going back, I had a funeral yesterday, and I got to go spend some time with a whole bunch of extended family. And one of the things I realized is, we could all grow up very similarly, same neighborhoods, same this, same that, all these other things, and like living drastically different lives. And it doesn't mean always because, oh, like this person's got money, this person doesn't. Like, no. There's people in my family that don't have much money that are very happy.
Mm.
People in my family that have a good amount of money that are very miserable. That are miserable every single day, and that's how they live their lives.
Mm.
And there's people that have a whole bunch of money that are happy. There's a whole bunch of people that have no money that are not happy. Right? It's like
Right.
it's all those of like how we carry it and how we walk with it and how we get we choose how we're living and
Yeah.
where we invest our time and money
Yeah.
and those things as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to give you any last notes before I
Yeah.
pray us out.
No, I mean, definitely just something to kind of like tie that back in when I was kind of talking about uh, some of the stuff with like the sometimes it's just right in front of you too. Is like
Yeah.
a lot of times I think as a coach too, because I know pretty good chunk of the people watching are probably like hitting. So kind of tie it back into like how that plays into how I coach personally, which is also just a melting pot of every coach I've ever had, coming out through me as well.
Mhm.
But how I express that as well is like, sometimes I think it's this next new drill, next new tool, next new thing that's going to get the result, when sometimes it's just a thing that it worked 2 months ago, and I've stopped doing it. It was the Bible that I was reading 2 months ago, and I just stopped reading it. That's going to give me the answer that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the yoga blocks that I was hitting on 2 months ago that I haven't touched in 2 months.
Yep, just
And they're
gotta wait for
collecting dust on the nightstand, that I need
My
to whip back
staple,
out.
a
And I
foundation.
need to go back to it, wake that pattern up, and then I'm back to what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I and also too when it comes to that, like, ideologies, is like I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think you've just ever went into a training session intending to create a new product,
Mm.
but as a byproduct of
Mm.
these things
Trying to
you were
help people.
seeing and trying to help them, poof, a couple products that are very useful tools
Yeah.
have come about. But again, your intentions weren't going into that, like,
Mm.
I'm going to create a new product that's going to help with this exact thing at this exact,
No, yeah.
like, you were like, hey, this hitter's struggling with this.
Yeah.
What
wish
do I
I
have
could do this.
available? Yeah, what do I have? Oh, let's try this. Oh, well, that's kind of similar to bot.
Mhm.
Blah, blah, blah. Poof, the farm
Yeah.
board happens,
100%.
And it's like, which also too, it wasn't just poof, the farm board happens, but it looks like poof, the farm board happens to some people. But
Yeah.
and so like to tie that into is just like how that goes into coaching is also too, just because it's what you've always done doesn't always mean that it's the right thing to do too.
Yep.
In the sense, just because I've always just prayed doesn't mean that that's the only way that I could
Yeah.
reach God.
Or it might be how I'm praying.
Yeah,
my
or
heart's
how,
at when I'm
right?
doing
It's like
it.
just because
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
using yoga blocks,
Yeah.
maybe I'm coaching it differently than I
100%.
should, And so,
Yeah.
to kind of tie that in, like you were saying, is like, how do you not talk about hitting and God in the same conversation? It's like, well, that's how it ties in personally for me. Is, I mean, it's clear as day for me, and I know it's not always that way for everybody. But giving some like real application and perspective of like, how do I see it, and how do I apply it, and how do I use that? And also too, how does he speak to me when I do have my time with him? Privately is too. It's like everything that you do, I'm there. Like I'm omnipresent. Like
Yeah.
when you're in the cage, you can ask me.
Mhm.
When you're on the drive home or drive to work, you can ask me. When you're in the shower, you can ask
Yeah.
me. You
When
can
you want to talk,
or you
talk
can
to me about
listen.
nonsense, you could talk.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
like he's already like, I already know this, but go on. It's
For
like,
sure.
go on. But
Yeah.
again, I just wanted to tie that into personally, how that applies personally as a hitting coach in my faith, and how that ties over, and why to some of the things I do. May not seem logical to the average person, but
Yeah.
guess what?
It's okay.
It's okay. It's like,
So good.
for me too, sometimes because I do think logical, like you said, he's just got to put a blockade in that path and
Yep.
make me walk by faith and not by this logical,
Come back and trust me.
whatever
Yeah.
thought process that I have. And it's like, that's okay. Did it work? Got there. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's the last thing I had. So,
No, yeah. When we were at ABCA, one of the coaches walked up to me and told me how much when I prayed us out, how much it meant to him,
Mm.
and that it really got him back praying. So I was like, oh.
it's
Dang.
cool.
I was like, I forgot for like 2 weeks, and then we did it last time, and I was like, okay, I was make sure in my head, like imprinted in my head, I'm like, I'm praying out. I'm praying out. He got me fired up. All right, so if you could join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for bringing us here today, God, and we're just so thankful for the conversations and the relationships that we continue to build. Help us remove any false foundations that we built, God. We want to build the biggest skyscraper that we know, to worship you, God, and bring attention to how mighty and gracious you are, and point everybody back to you. And to build that, we need your foundation, God. And as we help you gently, if you can gently help us remodel that foundation, build it, and so we can build our lives on top of you. And also surrender over the things that we're having problems surrendering over to you. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Well, until next time,
Yep.
Farm System out.